Welcome to the 23rd Annual Tellabration Concert presented by the Inland Valley Storytellers. My name is John St. Clair, and I will be your master of ceremonies this evening. And the first thing I need to check is to make sure everyone has a program. If you don't have a program, raise your hand. There's also some in the back. I think I gave you one too. Thank you. And down there, somebody needs one. Okay, the reason I wanted everybody to have a program is because this program is really special. And I made it. And I want to know that my efforts were well spent. So turn to the back of the program where it says special thanks. So it lists the people involved. And you can read through that, but the really, really important thing is the website address for the Inland Valley Storytellers. Because storytellers need story listeners. And I'm so glad that you guys are here tonight to hear our stories. But we also do monthly story swaps. And we meet in the Ginger Elliott Center in the historic Garner House in Memorial Park in Claremont. The third Monday of every month is free and open to the public, and that's where those of us who perform try out our new stories or practice the old ones, because if you don't keep telling stories, you forget them. And so, and that's especially true is when you get older like me. So, we love to have people come and listen, or if you want to try your hand at telling a story, either like a personal story from your childhood or some favorite story, a folk tale that you remember being told when you were a kid, you're welcome to try that out. We're very friendly and not too critical, although if you really want to hone your skills, you can ask for feedback. But it's free and open to the public, and it's a nice facility there. The acoustics are pretty good, as long as it isn't empty. It is an art exhibit as well as a conference center, and when there's no art in there, the voices bounce off the walls. But if there's art in there, it's really pretty good. And so save this program, because you can go to that website and get information about how to go to our story swap meetings, where it's held and what time, and there are directions. Those of you who live in Claremont, you know where Memorial Park is and the historic Garner House, I'm sure. But we also do another concert in the spring. We do a spring concert. We do 2 storytelling concerts per year. And that's how we keep the organization running, because we do have a website and we are an affiliate member of the National Storytelling Network, and we pay our dues to the NSN. And we also have to pay room rental to Claremont Heritage to use their facility every month. And so those expenses need to be paid for, and your coming here really helps a lot. So we thank you for that. So Tellabration is really special, and it started way back in 1988 in Connecticut. And every year, storytelling groups from all over the world, mostly in the United States, but there are some in other countries as well, they get together, usually the Saturday before Thanksgiving, but some of them do it 2 Saturdays before Thanksgiving, and some of them do it on Sunday. But it's a celebration of storytelling where we gather together to listen to great stories. And so to start this off, I'm going to read the proclamation. In the name of storytelling, Saturday, November 22nd, 2025, is hereby proclaimed to be Tellabration, the worldwide event of storytelling on this very day from San Diego to Sacramento, Utah to Connecticut, Seattle to Claremont. Over 100 audiences are gathered for this spectacular storytelling event. Without further delay, in joy and anticipation, let the stories begin. And I am going to be the first storyteller. Although I lied a little because I forgot to say something. If you have a cell phone, please put it on airplane mode or turn it off. It's very annoying to be telling a story and have somebody's phone start ringing. So if you haven't done that, please do that now. So I'm going to tell a folk tale from Korea, and it's called The Story Bag. Once long ago, there was a wealthy family that had one son, and this boy loved to have stories told to him. Whenever he met a new person, he'd always ask for a story. And every time he heard a new story, he would carefully take that story and he'd put it in a bag that he always kept on his side. And he heard many, many stories and kept putting many, many stories into that story bag until it got quite full. And the last couple of stories, he had to push and push and push to get the story inside of the bag. And then he tied the top of the bag with a strong cord so the stories would not fall out. Now, as he grew older, he heard fewer and fewer new stories. But he still would occasionally untie the bag, take out a story or two, and listen to them before putting them back in the bag and tying it back up. But when he became a teenager, his interest changed. And he was no longer interested in stories at that stage of his life, and he forgot all about the story bag. Now, he eventually grew up to be a handsome young man, and the time came when it was time for him to find a bride and get married. So the families arranged a marriage, and his parents' house was bustling with joyful activity, trying to get the house ready to welcome the bride to her new home. It was the custom at that time that he would go to the bride-to-be's home to be wed, and then he'd bring that bride-to-be back to his home. His parents were very wealthy, and they would have a whole section of the large mansion. And so there was an old servant that worked in this house, had worked for many, many years, and he knew this young man ever since he was a small child. In fact, he had told this boy stories, and he had taught him how to fish, and he also taught him the names of the birds that would perch in the trees in their garden. Well, he was working alone in the kitchen when he heard some whispering, and he didn't know where it was coming from. So he stopped what he was doing, and he followed the sound out of the kitchen, and he came to a small closet. He opened the door, and there on a hook was a bag, and the whispering was coming out of that bag. It was the story bag, the long-forgotten story bag from when the boy was young. And so the old servant listened carefully so he could tell what they were saying. "Listen here. The boy is to be wed tomorrow. He has kept us trapped in this bag for far too long, all crammed together so we don't know who we are or what we sound like anymore. He has tortured us for years. It's time for revenge." Then another voice said, "I have a plan. I will disguise myself as a beautiful berry bush with ripe red berries, only they'll be poisonous. And when he's being driven to the bride's house, I will cast a spell to make him hungry, and he'll stop and he'll eat my berries, and he'll die a slow and painful death." And then another voice said, if that doesn't work, I have an idea. I can become a bubbling brook, and I can cast a spell as he goes by, making him thirsty, and he'll stop and he'll take a drink, and my water will be poisonous, and he will die a painful death. And then another voice said, and if those don't work, when he brings the bride back to his parents' house, I'm going to change into poisonous string snakes and hide under the bed in the bridal chamber. And when they go to sleep, all the snakes will come slithering out, and they'll die from 1,000 bites from poisonous snakes. And so all these voices started laughing, and they sounded stark raving mad. And indeed they were. They had been oppressed for so long, crowded in that bag, that they were stark raving mad. And so the loyal servant knew he had to do something to protect the young man. And so he decided he needed to drive the carriage to the bride's house, and he needed to be there along the way to protect the young man. And so the next day, when the young man was getting ready to go into the carriage and the horseman was going to take him, and the old servant came out and said, no, I want to drive the carriage. I want to drive it. I've known this young man his whole life. He's very special to me. I want to do that. Now, the master of the house didn't like the idea of the old man driving the carriage, but he finally gave in. So the loyal servant did drive the carriage. And the horse was pulling the carriage along, and off to the side of the road, they came to the berry bushes. And all of a sudden, the young man said, oh, I am very, very hungry. Stop here. I want to eat some of those berries. And the servant said, those berries are a little tart, I think. There's a better berry bush up ahead. Let's go there. And so he kept going, and as soon as they had passed those magical poisonous berry bushes, the hunger was gone. He no longer had the hunger, and so he forgot about it. Well, next they came to that bubbling brook, and the young man said, oh, I'm so thirsty, I'm so parched, you've got to stop here and let me have a drink. And the loyal servant driving the carriage said, no, I think this one's a little bit salty. There's a better source of water up ahead. And he just kept going. And as soon as they had passed, the thirst was gone. Well, they got to the house, the bride's house, and they had the wedding. And after the wedding, then they got back in the carriage and drove back to the young man's parents' house, he and his bride. And when they got there, they had another celebration at his parents' house. And then it was time. It was late in the evening. And so the newlywed couple went to the bridal chambers and went into the room. And hiding outside was the loyal servant with a sword. And he waited until the lights went out and the talking stopped. And then he burst into the room, and right away the bride and groom sat up and said, what's the matter? Who's here? What do you want? And he said, listen, I'm here to save you. Quickly jump out of the bed and get away from that bed. And so they did what they were told. They jumped out of the bed. They didn't leave the room because they wanted to see what was going to happen. And right away, the snakes came slithering out, and the servant took his sword and slash and slash and stab and slash and stab. And he killed all of those snakes. And when he was done, he explained to the bride and groom what had happened. The fact that the stories have been cooped up, all crowded together in that story bag for so many years, they had gone stark raving mad. And after the young man heard what had happened, he decided, well, he felt bad for the stories, because then he remembered, oh yeah, I used to really like stories. But he had forgotten all about them. And so the next day, he went to the closet and walked up to the bag of stories and said, "I'm so sorry I forgot you and I left you all trapped inside of here." And then he gave that bag to one of his parents' servants and sent him out into the countryside to spread the stories to anyone who would listen to them. So you see, stories are to be shared, person to person, over great distances for all time. And if stories are shared and told, then they're kept alive and well. The story bag. So I chose to do that story first because I think it kind of sets the stage for the whole evening. And it's not just for the stories here, because stories need to be shared within families too. If you have stories from your childhood and you haven't shared them with your loved ones, maybe you ought to think about doing that. Stories need to be shared. It's really a very powerful thing. And so our next storyteller is Ron Evans, and Ron Evans has the distinction. He and his wife were at the very first Tellabration in Connecticut in 1988. So, which is quite a distinction. And Ron is a retired minister, and he tells all kinds of wonderful stories from his experiences. He also takes historical events sometimes and weaves a story around them. He's got a delightful way of spinning words in a very poetic way. And he has been telling stories with us here at the Inland Valley Storytellers, I think since 2009. Let me see. Yeah, he's been participating in our concerts since 2009, so we are very lucky to have him. Please welcome Ron Evans.
John, that's very kind and typically generous, and I'll try to live up to that. And you're absolutely right. I am tremendous in my own mind. Thinking back to the past, as often storytellers must, to conjure up something that has happened and make it live again. This is sacred space, of course, and we think of the wonderful voice who so often entertained us here, who died during the past year, Andrea Lloyd, who learned so much in this very place. Her musical interests were encouraged and toned and honed here, and so often did she tell stories, especially here. So none of us can gather in this place without thinking of in this time now, the absence of her voice and style. So I know that we are on holy ground in this place. Sometimes stories have to have a title. I'm not sure if they should or in every case, but this one happens to have a title. It is The Last Check. It's impossible, absolutely, positively impossible to be alone at the Murphys. And Janet and I know this for a fact. You see, the Murphys are a family who live in Connecticut, and actually that's where they reside. But we found that there are vestiges of the Murphys in many other places around the world as well. But this particular family lived in such an obvious way that as soon as you were in their home, you were surrounded by the Murphys, especially in that great old Victorian dining room at the center of the house. The whole house was wonderful, but the dining room was the place where all the action really took place. Because not only did they eat there, that was the place where all the children did their homework on school nights. During the day, it was often a community central meeting place for all kinds of events and plannings and a honing of all kinds of activities that were positive throughout the community. It was also a place where, at the end of the day, tea would be served and people would reflect on the day and share events. The whole idea of the Murphys would be reflected in that dining room. And even better than just a room itself and a fine old table, the place was just wallpapered with Murphys, in the sense that they had pictures on the wall. Every single picture on the wall was some photograph of the Murphy family, except for one. And all of those pictures were happy remembrances of how their life was lived, and lived to the hilt, and in any way celebrated and should be remembered to be true. Now, Terry and Mary lived, as I say, in Darien, Connecticut, a community which some have said would be something that God would have done if she'd had the money. It was about an hour out of New York City by train on the Connecticut coast. And Terry worked with the IBM. He was middle management with the then very famous online division. And that meant that every morning he would be on the 5:15 train to get to New York. And every night he would be on the 5:07 from Grand Central Terminal to be home at 6:30, because dinner was at 6:30 every single night. And so it was that their lives were both in New York, but mostly there at home in Connecticut. Terry had a remarkable way of managing things in his domain, which was with IBM. But it was Mary who was the CEO at home. Managed everything. I mean, not only the planning of the meals, but the cooking and the cleaning up, which everyone was invited. Well, shall we say more than invited to take part in that activity. Sort of managed the whole household in every single way, and every day was a new adventure with Mary at the core of that all. Now, being a good Irish Catholic family and having 7 children, there was a certain order of how things should be done, and a certain tradition that things would be carried on in a certain way. And there were certain rules that had to be not only observed, but had to be continually practiced, and practiced well. One of them was that every member of the family would be engaged in some kind of voluntary activity that's positive to the community. Everyone had to do that. Another was that each of the children, as they would come along, they would be guided, prodded, protected, encouraged by the one before them, the next older child. That meant that every child had the whole family looking after them, but there was at least one who was really going to be urging you and looking out for you and watching out for you and watching you all the time. In short, they all looked after each other, and it was really quite remarkable in that way. There was also the tradition that, being good Irish Catholics, everyone went to church every Sunday. But it mattered not where you went to church as long as you did. And that's how Janet and I got to know them, because, of course, all those children wanted to come to our church because we had the most progressive children's youth program in the church. So there you are. It was a wonderful, wonderful association that we all had through town, and everybody knew something about the Murphys. Well, as a community, one that appreciates the Murphys and the Murphys who appreciated the community, there would be other kinds of traditions as well. I would like to tell you about some of those, but I know that from experience, many of your watches tend to run fast. So I'll only give you just 1 or 2 examples of how the Murrays got on. One was the fact that education was very, very important. And it was in terms that everybody went to school, but also valued the education that everybody else had. That was important. Another thing was that every activity that somebody else was involved in, you were to take an interest in it as well. particularly at celebration times, or at game time, or at the recital for music, or at some play or whatever. It was the responsibility of every member of that family to attend the event of every other. Impossible to do, of course, but that had to be your first priority. And if there are other conflicts, well, that number two was a long way from number one. So every time there was an event, there were Murrays there. And as the family grew and grew and grew, it became marvelously tighter and tighter and tighter because more and more people could come to each other's event and celebrate them as well. Another part of the educational aspect of all of this, which I found remarkable, is that everybody tried to learn from the other. Now, when you celebrate things in certain order, I mean, certainly children coming along in a certain order, and school graduations and the like, and if you're in a certain order mostly, but marriages don't always occur in a certain order. In fact, Brendan, who was the oldest of the seven, was the last to be married. Brendan went to MIT. He liked to tell me that he couldn't get into Caltech and Harvey Mudd, so he had to go to MIT. Stayed on there and married Gwen Lewis, or didn't marry her actually. They came to keep company and were an item for some 18, nearly 20 years. Everybody loved Gwen and hoped that they would get married. Everybody else got married, but they didn't. And then, on that fateful Thursday evening, Brendan called his parents and said, "Yes, we're going to get married on Sunday afternoon at the Quaker meeting in Cambridge, just outside of Boston." Well, Mary said, "How wonderful." I mean, again, everybody has loved Quinn. "Can we come?" Brendan said, "Well, sure. I mean, but I'm just calling to tell you that I know you've wanted us to get married, but we've been an item for so long we could have thought we were married already, but sure you can." Then Terry plugged into the phone and said, "Well, can we all come?" And Brendan said, "You mean everybody?" And Terry said, "Well, yes, everybody." That was Thursday after supper. From then on, email, texting, mexting, shouting, yelling, calling, whatever, all around. At 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, every single one of those Murphys were at that wedding in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And they came from 5 states, 3 time zones, and even Katie, the youngest, managed somehow to get a cheap flight from London, where she was doing research on her graduate project in art history. I mean, for the Murphys, it was not just a tradition, it was a real, absolutely positive exercise that we all be and support one another. Well, such a family, as you would imagine, as I've already said, education was important to them. I could tell you other stories about that as well, but let me just add one final incident. And for me, it's pretty dramatic. You see, everybody understood that they would be on the family payroll for 4 years, 8 semesters. Yes, it was an understanding that each one of those 7 children, as they grew up, would have the support of the family for 4 years of college, 8 semesters. Not 9. If you stretched it out, you were on your own. But you're on the family payroll for those first 8. And that was your responsibility. And in order to make sure that that worked out, every single August or early September, Terry would sit down with each one before they went off to college to work out the plans for the year. And you had to come prepared, not just knowing what the tuition and fees would be, but books and food and all the expensive. One trip back at home for Christmas, not anything at Thanksgiving or one of those fantasy trips to Fort Lauderdale in the spring or whatever, that was your responsibility. But 1 year. And then when the final agreement of what that total amount of money would be had been decided, everybody agreed, Tony would take out his checkbook, write one check, rip it off, hand it to them and say, "Okay, this is it. It's your responsibility now." The whole thing. Imagine doing that for 7 4 times a year. Well, it was a marvelous learning experience for all of them, witnessed again by the pictures in the dining room of celebrating so many graduations and other special events and the like. But then again, there was a bit of a hiccup at the very end. Again, Katie, who was the youngest, phoned her mother in March of her senior year. Mother, did the check that Dad wrote last August clear the bank okay? Why, yes, dear, I think it did. Is anything wrong? Nothing wrong. Just want to know if it cleared all right. Well, I'm sure it did. Why? Well, I'd like to have the check if you can get a hold of it. Really? Are you sure everything's all right? Yes, it's all right, Mother. Not to worry. It's okay. Well, Katie had been a scrapbooker since the time she had been 7, so everybody assumed, of course, it was just something to add to her collection of things and memory book and the scrapbook, so her mother was able to get the check and send it off to her, and there it was. Until graduation. And then there was a party, and a great party, because all of the Murphys came together to celebrate the last one of their undergraduate degree, and there was a great, great party. And at the end of the party, all 7 stood up and asked their parents to stand up too, and then handed them back the check. Each one of them had signed it. It was framed. And now it's in the dining room, in that great, wonderful dining room with all of those Murray pictures. I said that they were all photographs except one. The one that's not a photograph is that autographed check. It's right above the light switch. So if you ever happen by Darien, Connecticut, do stop in. The door is always open. I'm sure they'll turn and leave a light on for you. And you'll just always be welcome at the Murphys. No question about that. Lux et Veritas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. And thank you for mentioning Angela Lloyd. This is the first Tellabration without her in our group. She died last January. She performed last year here. That was her last performance, because it was only a month or 6 weeks later that she died. And we did dedicate our spring concert to her memory. And the National Storytelling Network they did a big fundraiser, and they have an award in Angela's name given to the storyteller that is deemed to have been doing the most for educating and encouraging young storytellers just getting started in the field. So thanks for bringing that up, Ron. Okay, our next storyteller is Michael D. McCarty. And Michael is quite an experience. He tells stories with an enthusiasm that is unmatched by anyone I know. And I heard him for the first time way back in the late 90s. He did a fundraiser for the Claremont Folk Music Festival. And I was very impressed. He was the whole program. And he has no problem talking for long periods of time. And he is the ultimate entertainer. And we're so glad to have Michael here. Please welcome Michael D. McCarty.
Oh, how the heaven are y'all? I'm going to sit my old ass down. So I have a story and a half for you today. The first story I'm going to tell you is a folk tale from India, and it's called The King's Knuckle-Headed Sons. Once in India, there was a great king, a mighty king, a wise king. His subjects loved him, and they were so happy when he had 2 sons. Unfortunately, As time went on, it became apparent that these two sons were pure, unadulterated knuckleheads. They were such knuckleheads, they didn't want to learn nothing. They were such knuckleheads, if you put a book near them, the print fell off. Okay, they were knuckleheads. And the king tried everything to get them to learn. He got teachers and gurus and all kinds of folks trying to teach them to learn, but they would not learn, not nary nothing. Oh, but he kept trying and kept trying, but they just refused to learn. Well, the king is getting older. He's got to have at least one son with some sense. So in desperation, or actually in brilliance, he turned to Guru Swami. Guru Swami was wise, was insightful, and he was sure that Guru Swami could perhaps save his sons from their knuckleheadedness. Probably never heard that word before. So he comes to Guru Swami. He explains the situation. Guru Swami says, yes. This will not be a problem. He said, well, what do you need? Do you need money? He said, no. I need a space in your garden. I need a space in your garden. That's all I need. Okay, you sure you don't need it? No. I just need a space in your garden. So, Guru Swami was given this space in his garden, and he went about his daily tasks within the garden. Now the sons, they had heard of Guru Swami. They had heard that Guru Swami was going to educate them. No, he won't. But Guru Swami ignored them totally. He would be about the work in his garden. He would be about books and things and reading and what have you. And finally, the sons, they said, oh, Guru Swami, what are you doing? He said, oh, I'm just working in my garden. They said, well, what kind of work are you doing? He says, oh, I have some reading I do. I do some work in the garden. I have these texts I read. They said, oh, what kind of reading? What kind of text do you read? And slowly, the two sons started learning things. They started reading stuff, and he snuck it in on them. All of a sudden, he'd just be off doing something. They would start asking questions, and he would be teaching them. And slowly, these sons became educated. They became insightful. They became useful. They were unknuckleheadified. Again, a word you will never hear anywhere else in life. And sometimes that's what we need. I work with kids, okay? I work with kids. And I got two little stories I want to share with you. I was working with some knuckleheads. This was at a school, a continuation school. Y'all know what I mean when I say continuation school? Y'all be knowing, badass chillin'. And the first day, I walked into this classroom, and there's a kid sitting like right where John is sitting. And he's sitting there, he bites off a fingernail and spits it towards me. I saw the headline, Storyteller Kills Children. And so I said, everybody, get out. Get out. Get out. 'Cause I see it. I don't want to go to jail. I just got married. I don't know. But this knuckleheaded child comes back in, and he's sitting in one of those chair desks, not stationary, but, chair desk thingies. And it just came over me. I found myself getting up and walking towards this child. And I said, you got something to say to me? What you talking about? I said, you got something to say to me? What you talking about? Now, I got a bad back and bad knees. But on this day, the powers that be said, kick that ass. I grabbed the chair he was sitting in by the desk part, and I picked it up. And I said, you got something to say to me? I'm sorry. Boom, get out. And after that, they became much more civil towards me. One more story I got to share with you. Now, I get everybody got one of the little pop open cards. I love giving those pop open cards. I hope you enjoy the card. So, I live in Inglewood in a complex called Briarwood. I've been in there for 26 years. So that's how long my wife and I have been married. When I first moved in, there was a family 2 units over from us. The parents were from Ethiopia and the children had been born here, the son and the daughter. The daughter was oldest. When I met the son, he was in elementary school. So they were excited. Have any of you seen that old Skittles commercial with the guy milking giraffe? That's me. So they were excited about me, and so I had them come by, and I gave them books. That's what I do. I give children books. I give books, I give books, I give books. So I hadn't seen the young man in a number of years. So I saw him a couple of weeks ago. He was driving in, and I went over to give him and his family, I always give them pop-open cards, and I said, how are you doing? Where are you in school? He's about to graduate from graduate school. Now, I don't remember the field that he is graduating in, but he told me this. You gave me the book about this field, and now he's getting a master's degree. Give kids books. Give kids books. Say it with me. Give kids books. And that's the end of that.
Thank you, Michael. Always a pleasure. Okay, so our next storyteller is Nick Smith. And Nick Smith has been active in the Inland Valley Storytellers since 2004, almost as long as me. And he used to, for many years, run a storytelling group in Pasadena, which no longer exists. But he also is one of the big movers and shakers in the Pasadena Folk Music Society, and they get wonderful folk music artists that perform at Caltech and other places. So he's also in the past been involved in festivals, folk music festivals that have a component of storytelling in them. There's really in some venues and events, there's a nice symbiotic relationship between folk music and folk tales and storytellers. So Nick has been involved in solstice celebrations from the past, and has just been a driving force in Southern California, and his experiences in organizing and running events has been very helpful to the Inland Valley Storytellers, and he's been kind of a mentor to me as the leader of the Inland Valley Storytellers. If I ever have a question about something, I go to Nick and ask him, because I know he has a wealth of knowledge. But he also is a very good storyteller. He's a retired librarian, and he tells all kinds of stories, and I understand tonight is one I haven't heard before. So please welcome Nick Smith.
Now, I want to set the stage for you, because if you look up and see all of these drums around the wall, imagine that those are barrels and bins filled with grain. And the patriarch of this family, he and his family went through hard times, and the way that it comforts him is to have as much food as his family could need through several famines in a row, and to have that around the walls of his home. He could go to sleep in comfort knowing that that food is there. But also where you see all of these instruments from small to large, imagine that he has established a symbol within his family, a symbol of a sword, the sword to defend your own, from tiny swords to the largest that a man could hold. And that too comforted him. Well, the third thing that you must understand is that in this home, with all of the food, with all of the swords, there was also a mouse hole. Now, if you know anything about mice, you will know that where there's a mouse hole, there are mice. And where there are mice, there's usually a cat waiting to catch and eat those mice. And sure enough, in this home, there was such. Now those mice were there in the mouse hole discussing the problem because the cat that was protecting this family's food, this whole clan's food, was out to get them. And the young, well, you can't really call him a man because he was a mouse. But you see, the young, enthusiastic, not quite adult mouse really wanted to help his family get the food. There was so much food. The family, the clan that lived there couldn't possibly eat it in years of eating. How much could a mouse eat? They could surely spare it. But this cat not only prevented them from getting the food, but it threatened their very lives. Well, one night, after the patriarch of the family had gone to bed, surrounded by food and the symbols of the swords, things came to a head. And the young mouse said, "I can't stand it anymore. I don't care if it costs me my life. I will get some of that food for my family." And so, in the middle of the night, the mouse sneaked out. And then when he got clear of the mouse hole, he couldn't see the cat in any direction. And so he ran in the direction of the nearest wall containing barrels and boxes of food. And that's when the cat made its appearance. Jumping out from a different direction, sitting in the middle of the floor, it said, "Now, try to get back to your mouse hole." Well, this was the snapping of the final straw on the camel's back, because this mouse could take no more. And the mouse said, "I don't care what happens to me. I will fight you with my last breath." Well, the cat sort of collapsed in giggles on the floor. "You're going to fight me?" "Yes," said the mouse. And he ran up to one of the walls, and he found the tiniest sword there, and grabbed it and said, "I will fight you." Well, the cat was astonished, but not so astonished that he didn't look at the swords himself. And he went over and said, "All right, we'll make this a duel." And he grabbed one of the slightly larger swords, as much larger as the mouse's sword as the cat was to the mouse. And so they began a fight in the middle of the night there. Well, there was one witness to this battle, and that was the family's dog. because the dog was sitting there and he heard the sounds of swords clashing in the master's bedroom entryway. And he thought, there's a sword fight inside the. And he looked and he saw the mouse and the cat jumping and bouncing like a scene from an Errol Flynn movie. And there they were, swords clashing, but bouncing off of the barrels and boxes of food. And the dog thought, oh no. And he looked where these were compared to where his master was asleep, because the master loved to be surrounded by these huge barrels of food. And the dog thought, what if something goes wrong? What if they knock over these barrels onto my master? And oh no, this would be terrible. And so the dog did what a dog will do under such circumstances. He ran to get help. And so he ran out. Now it happens that you may think that it is traditional for animals to sleep through the night as the human masters, but in fact, a lot of them are either awake doing their own things or just very easy to wake up. And the first thing that he saw outside the door was Rooster, because Rooster spent all day, and this was late in the night, and he was going to be awake in a couple of hours anyway to welcome the sun. And, well, there was Rooster. And Dog ran up and said, Rooster, come back and help me. We have to end the fight. It's inside the house. A fight inside the house? Who's fighting? Well, it's Cat and a mouse. They're fighting with swords. And the Rooster said, what? First, if they're fighting with swords and I go in and try to stop them, I might get hurt. Second, I'm not welcome in the house. It has something to do with my being a rooster. And, you know, if I go in there and wake the master up, he's going to kick me out the door, and that will hurt. And besides, why should I bother? It's a mouse and a cat fighting. And the dog tried to explain that, no, they're endangering the master of the house because all of the food, they might knock over one of the barrels and it might fall on the master. And it's like, absolutely not, said the rooster. This is none of my business, none of my doing. I will let this cat and mouse fight it out on their own, and I will go back to the hen house and rest until the sun comes ready to be awakened. The dog ran off to find other help that would be more helpful. And there, over by the tree, there was Horse. Horse was tied up there under the tree, and Dog went and said, Horse, quickly, wake up, please. What? Horse was actually trying to sleep. Horses do that. Yeah. But in this case, Dog was so upset that Horse realized there must be something going on. And the dog said, yes, a cat and a mouse are fighting, and they're endangering the master. How could a cat and a mouse fighting endanger the master? And the dog went on to explain, well, they're fighting with swords, and they're bouncing off the food, and they're going to cause things to fall on the master, and it would be terribly embarrassing to have to explain the master being killed by falling food. But I know. You can run really quickly. You can run and get help. And the horse said, no. What? Well, it's, you know, this family rides me to and fro, whipping me with sticks to make me run faster. And when I get home, they tie me to a tree. They don't bring me inside. If the weather's bad, I'm still tied up under a tree. If the sun is shining and I get too hot, I'm still tied up under a tree. Why should I go in there to break up a fight between a cat and a mouse, which is so ridiculous? And besides, I'm a horse. Going in to break up a fight between a cat and a mouse might cause some of the very things that you're worried about. Well, I'll have to find someone else. And so the dog ran off into where the other animals were. And there's Goat. Goat was always being in arguments with people. He would understand how dangerous this was. And Dog ran up to Goat and explained the whole situation and how this endangered the master and what could go wrong. And Goat said, "Wow, can I come and watch the fight?" Goats, you see, tend to be on the antagonistic side, and they will fight themselves for hours at a time. And he didn't see that this was a problem because nobody except the participants would ever get hurt, right? After all, it was a cat and a mouse. Cats and mice have been fighting for generations. And so he was not going to be any help either. Finally, Dog went to find Bull. Bull was big and strong and intimidating, and everyone paid attention to what Bull did. And if the fight was going to be stopped at all, Bull could do it. And there he found Bull out on the pasture dozing after a long meal. And Bull was there, and Dog went up and explained the problem, and Bull said, "No, you don't understand. This is an emergency. We have to stop this fight." "No." "What do you mean, no?" "Well, I'm not exactly welcome in the house. And besides that, I don't think it's my job to stop a fight between a cat and a mouse just because the master has slept someplace that he is in danger from a cat and a mouse." "But you don't understand. If he is in danger and things go wrong, think about the things that could happen. If the food falls on him and he dies, won't that upset everything in the community?" "No, I don't imagine that at all." And took another bite of grass and went back to minding his own business. Well, Dog ran back to the house just in case he could come up with something to do, because he wasn't sure he could get into the middle of a fight between a mouse and a cat, both armed with swords. And as he entered the house, there was a terrible crash. The cat and the mouse had fought so long and so hard and bounced off and cut into one of the great big barrels of food, just enough that it weakened the side of the barrel. And the food, the grain, began to spew out, and that one was supporting another barrel above it, and another barrel above that. And with no grain inside the one on the bottom, it was weakened. And the second barrel slid down, and the third tipped forward and crashed right on top of where the cat and the mouse were fighting, which was just near the master's left ear. And so all of them were crushed by 100 pounds of grain. Needless to say, things did not go well in the morning. When the family came in and found the patriarch of the family crushed to death by the food he had so loved. And apparently, a cat and a mouse and 2 small swords there to confuse the issue about just what had happened. Well, the family went in, and the dog tried to bark and tried to point to things, and the family, not understanding Dog, kicked him out of the house and tried to figure things out on their own. But they had to arrange for the funeral, and they had to follow the traditions and customs. And that meant, what do they need to do? And the priest came and told them what they needed to do. One of the things they would need to do was to sacrifice a rooster for the ceremony. Rooster heard this plan and did not like what that sounded like was going to happen, him being the only rooster nearby. And he ran off and hid. Well, because the dog wasn't going to be around people who were kicking at him to get him out from underfoot, he crawled under the house, and there was Rooster. And Rooster said, "You have to help me." "Why?" Well, they're going to sacrifice me." "Yes, and when I told you that there was a problem if the master died, you didn't really want to help now, did you?" And the Rooster said, "Well, and couldn't think of a good answer to that, especially since dog barking at the rooster had attracted the attention of a family member who came down and looked, and there was Rooster. And suddenly, the sacrificial rooster had been found and was to be readied. Now, it turns out there was another ingredient that was needed. They needed an animal large enough to provide blood for marking the victim's feet, to allow the victim to walk to the afterlife. About a goat's worth of blood would do. And, you know, a goat's worth of blood meant a goat. And you see, the goat was not really happy with this solution, but eventually he was caught and readied. Horse. Oh, horse was not to be sacrificed. Horse was valuable. Horse was how the messages were being delivered all around the countryside. Miles back and forth, running until he was almost exhausted to the point of death. And Horse said, "Dog, can you rescue me?" And Dog said, "No. I tried to tell you that there was a problem and you didn't want to contribute. Now you see how the community suffers, including you?" Well, you probably can guess the rest of it, because for the wake after a death, you have to have a lot of food. And that was the fate of the bull, who also had not wanted to respond in the name of preventing disaster for the community. And so it was that the family, the clan, had all the food they could possibly want for years and years, but no patriarch left to guide them, and they soon fell out in arguments between the members of the family. Gradually, they sold land. They sold the collection of swords gathered in the name of protection. And the dog lived long enough to see all of this. But he didn't stay with the family because they were all too busy arguing and fighting and kicking at the dog, who was one of the few animals remaining. And so, for the want of the actions of a rooster, or a goat, or a horse, or a bull, a family was lost because of a sword fight between a cat and a mouse. So it is, so it is. But before I leave the stage, I need to tell you where that story came from. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, the European countries that had colonies in Africa were forced to relinquish them. And the French colony of what they had called Upper Volta became independent again after the French had ruled it for 100 years. When that happened, for the first time, the people of that nation, which is now called Burkina Faso, they were able to send an ambassador to the United States to represent them, and an ambassador to the United Nations to represent them. But the man that they sent was not just a politician. He was a storyteller. And other than meeting with John F. Kennedy and representing his country in the United Nations, he wrote 2 books of stories of the Upper Volta region, translated into English for the first time, because he wanted these stories to be preserved the way they had been preserved orally for over 1,000 years. So it was that he was a politician and a storyteller, and even though he lost when he actually ran for president of Burkina Faso, he was so proud of the fact that the stories were outliving him. And that's the duel between a cat and a mouse.
Thank you, Nick. That was great. Okay, our next storyteller is Antonio Sacre. And as the program says, Antonio Sacre has been telling stories for 25 years in 13 countries and 45 states to over 3 million people. He performed here about 10 years ago and delighted everyone who was in attendance that day, and we are so lucky to have Antonio Sacre back again.
Thank you. I think about Angela Lloyd every day, because when I'm driving on the freeways in Los Angeles, you know that there's the carpool lanes, and then you also have you can pay to be up, but the carpool lane you get people in the car, and I never have people in the car. Coming out here tonight, I could have got here a little bit earlier. Angela always traveled in the carpool lanes, whether she had anybody in them or not. And so she was never late to come and visit me. We hung out all the time. She would come into town, or I'd come out to see her. And I'd say, Angela, aren't you worried about getting a ticket? She says, well, I do get tickets. But I look at it as like a toll that I just pay every year. So every time I drive, I think of Angela. And every night I think of Angela, because when my child was born 16 years ago, she said, I had to go on stage at the Ojai Storytelling Festival. And I had about 3 minutes. She goes, do you want to hear a lullaby that you can sing to your child every night? And I said, I would, but I have to get on stage. She goes, no, I have to sing it to you right now. And so she sang it to me, and I was very annoyed, and I was late to get on the stage, and I have been singing that lullaby to my children every night ever since. I think about Angela every day. My father is from Cuba, and when we would talk on the phone, he would, not every time, but every 5 or 6 conversations would say, mijo, I'll translate if you don't speak Spanish, es un milagro que ganan la vida diciendo cuentos, porque en nuestra familia tú eres el 10º mejor cuentista en la familia. He said, it's amazing you make a living as a storyteller, because you're like the 10th best storyteller in our family. And I used to laugh about that. And then one day I said, well, who are the other 10 storytellers? He said, ay, mijo. And he went through and I'm like, yeah, you're right, that one, that. Yeah, you're right, I'm about 10. And I told my mom that joke, and she said, she says, yeah, you did. My mom's from Boston. She says, yeah, your dad's right. You're probably about the 10th best storyteller in the family. She says, but you're the best listener in the family. And I love that dichotomy. My mom and my dad, the Boston Cuban Irish couple. They met in Boston. My dad was just a recent immigrant from Cuba, and 9 months and 2 days later I was born. And then they got married, and they had this amazing relationship. And when on the day that they were leaving the hospital at Boston, where I was born, there was a picture of the stork on the floor. And the nurse said to my mom, "Oh, Mrs. Sacre, don't step on the stork, or you're going to be back here in 1 year." And my mom looked at my dad. She goes, "I'm not superstitious." And she walked over to the stork and she stomped on it. And the nurse went, "Oh," and my mom went, stomped on it again. And exactly 365 days later, she gave birth to twins. We all have the exact same birthday. And my mom said that when she was carrying one twin, my dad was carrying the other twin, they walked wide around the store. And my mom will say, 3 boys in 1 year, I'm a candidate for sainthood. And my dad says, 3 boys in 1 year, that's the man that I am. And I'm really blessed to have those. I think about it all the time because I talk to my dad about Cuba and why he left and why we don't go back and all the politics and all the different years about it. And that man hated Castro and hated the communists. And he said, but without Castro, I never would have come to this country and meet your mother. I never would have had you. And then they had this just miserable divorce, this terrible divorce, didn't speak for many years. And then they, as we all started getting married and having kids, they came back together. And even that, they said, I'm glad that happened, because if we never met, we never would have had you. So that's the kind of thing. And growing up, after that divorce, we had to split the holidays. So my mom would take us in the Volare station wagon from Delaware to Boston. We ended up settling in Delaware, and we get to see that whole family. And that was back in the days, most of you are old enough. Remember when there was nothing on the radio? You had a few stations on the radio, and you'd drive out. And then we would just invent games. So we played the counting cows game, where you counted cows on either side of the thing. And my mom invented all kinds of things. If you saw a goat, you added 10. And if you saw a sheep, you divided by 2. She was trying to teach math, but keep us busy. And then if you passed a church, all of your cows died. And then if you passed another church, they were resurrected. And it was like, and so we'd finally get to Boston and at Thanksgiving. So this week, I'm thinking about that whole family. We'd all crammed into Aunt Joan's house just outside of Boston. And she was kind of a terrible cook, but she made spectacular pies. She made pies she made apple pies just made with just lard and sugar and then coated in sugar. And it's just so amazing. And all the adults would sit at the big dining room table. She didn't have that big of a house, but then all of the kids, there's 15 of us cousins, a big Irish family, and we'd all sit on little fold-up card tables in the den. And one of us would say, hey, when do we get to sit at the big table? And Uncle Pat, the youngest of the older people, would say, when you get older. And every year we'd ask that same question, and we realized that everybody gets older. And the only way to move up to the big table is for someone to die. And thankfully it didn't happen for a long time. And then we all had kids. And all of our kids sit on the floor with little paper plates saying, when do we get the card tables? And I say, when Uncle Pat dies. And then afterwards, we'd cram into that space and we'd listen to those adults tell some of the same stories and some new stories. And I would just listen. I would absorb these stories, and I'd go back to Delaware, and I'd tell my friends, "Oh, I can't listen to what my Uncle Pat said, what my Uncle Tom said." And so I became this storyteller in my little high school. And then the first Christmas, we almost spent all the Christmases in Boston, and there was frozen skating on the ice ponds, and there was huge snowball fights with 15 cousins, and then the crowding around the table. But Miami was a different story. And my dad's family in Miami, there wasn't that many of them. And the first time we got there, my 2 brothers and I, my grandmother was there, and it was Christmas Eve. And my brother was complaining. He's like, there's no snow down here. No hay nieve, abuela. She says, sí, pero tenemos la Nochebuena. We celebrate Nochebuena. What's Nochebuena? This all happened in Spanish. She says, oh, it's a huge party. And my grandmother took us into the kitchen, and there was just all of these people cooking and this massive meal. And as we were just getting ready to eat, we're so hungry, my grandmother held up her cup, and she says, let us give thanks that we're all here together. And we all cheered. She said, let us be sad that some of our family is no longer here with us. Aww. And let us be glad that we have this food to eat. Yay. And sad that some people don't have enough to eat. Aww. And glad that the kids came down from up north to celebrate Nochebuena with the Cuban family. Yay! And sad that they have no snow to play in. Aww. And glad that the basketball team won last night. Yay! And sad that the football team lost last weekend. Aww. And my brother whispered, hey, when are we going to eat? And my grandmother said, let us again give thanks that the kids came down to visit. Yay! And be sad that my little grandson has no patience. And then we had the meal. The meal was amazing. And then they put records on the record player. Who remembers records? And they would dance, and we danced until like 4 o'clock in the morning. It was unbelievable. Our little teen minds were blown. And my grandmother tucked the 3 of us into one bed. She didn't have a big house. And I turned to my brothers. We were probably, I don't know, just right at that age, maybe younger than that. I said, oh my gosh, if this is how the Cubans do Christmas Eve, can you imagine what Christmas is going to be like tomorrow morning. And my brother Robbie, he couldn't wait, and we woke up and we go out in the living room, and there's nothing. There's nothing at all. And he burst into tears. He says, Santa didn't come down to Miami. And my grandmother came out. I have to say it in Spanish, I'll translate. She said, Oye, Santa Claus, ¿qué carajo es Santa Claus? Es una cosa que inventaron los americanos para vender mierda. She said, Santa Claus is something Americans invented to sell you shit, okay? And he's like crying. He's like, what's Santa? And my dad comes out and he goes, Santa went to Uncle Tito's house. And so like, and we get our little bathrobes and we get out, and Tito's like 3 houses down. We're running down the street to see what Santa is. And my dad like gets on the phone, and Tito comes out, and he's got this huge cigar. He's got a bathrobe on. He's like, come here. And in his living room, there's like there's a piece of newspaper, and he's like, Santa got you a basketball, and he pulls a newspaper. There's like an old basketball and a garden hose, and he points to the hose. And we took the hose, and we had a big water fight there. We went and played basketball. It was the best Christmas ever. And as I got older and older, all those old people started dying. And there was room at the big table, but they just gave more room for the people who were there. So we're still in the little living room in Boston. And I called my dad a couple years ago. I said, hey, Dad, of all the top 10 storytellers, you know, a lot of them are dead. So I think there's only 2 or 3 of us left, and there's you. So what number storyteller am I now? He said, I'm Mijo. I miss the old people. He said, but even dead, they're better storyteller than you. Happy holidays to you all. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Antonio. That was wonderful. So, a couple of things I want to say before you get out of your chairs. First of all, we do have refreshments that are going to be served outside. You're not allowed to eat inside here. So don't get something to eat and come walking back in. All right, everything stays outside. And secondly, I forgot to tell you, the Inland Valley Storytellers has a YouTube channel. And remember I said how important that program was. So if you go to our website, there's a link to the YouTube channel. You can hear this program, which is being recorded. You can hear past Tellabrations that have been recorded. You can hear our monthly story swap meetings that have been recorded. And of course, that's all free on YouTube. So don't throw that program away. And then before you get up and enjoy the refreshments, which, by the way, let's give a hand to my wife, Chris, and Jane that are setting everything up out there. I would like all the storytellers to come up to the stage, and we'll take a bow. Can you take a photo?
We are bowing.
Okay, you can give us a round of applause. Thank you all. Hope I see you again, and maybe see some of you at our story swap meeting. I'd love to have you come.
Thank you, John.